What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to Listen Up with me, Ollie Baisley, and we are live here on Forge Radio and on the podcast and on demand. How are you doing today? It's a fascinating day here in the world. Monday, the 30th of October. It's not too far away from Halloween, and it is really approaching. I, in fact, have a nun's outfit for Halloween, and it's very exciting. But let me explain. So, we, in the past, have had a podcast and a radio show, and we split them up. But now, and going forwards, we're going to merge them to save me time, and I think also just make it more fluid. And it's also more of a challenge for me going forwards. And hopefully, that is going to be produce better content and also be more exciting. So, today's episode is all about one of the tests that I've been doing on a nootropic called Alpha Brain. It's a kind of a supplement which is meant to make you smarter. It's a bit like caffeine. It's meant to kind of increase your concentration. And over the past 35 days, I've been doing a test, and I'm going to talk to you about it today. So I'm very excited about that. And what more could you do want kind of here, live, on the podcast and on Forge Radio? So let's talk about the previous episodes. If you haven't heard the series so far, at Listen Up on Cast on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Go check us out, because you can find interviews with world-class cyclists who have recovered from cancer, journalists, producers and various other people, which I believe was fascinating, and it was such a pleasure doing those interviews. And so today's episode is more of kind of a in-depth and an analytical show where we kind of go behind the scenes of things and really break stuff down and discuss it and kind of hopefully give you some beneficial listening. So before we get into the show, like I said, check us out on social media at Listen Upcast. It's where you can find all the information and all the kind of interesting stuff about the show and kind of more about where we go from here. So let's talk about Alpha Brain. Alpha Brain is a product produced by Onnit, which is an American company, and it is supposedly, it's a nootropic, which is a kind of type of supplement, and it supposedly makes you smarter, better concentration, and kind of helps you, you know, if you need a bit like you need coffee, you know, you kind of want to really concentrate, you need to focus on a task, and that is what Alpha Brain reportedly does. And I've heard so many different things about various different forms of, you know, supplements or even medication, which we'll get onto later in the show. We hear about people's experiences of such things, and you know, I'm always asked to try and be better, try and be more focused, try and do better with my work, and I was really interested about this, so I ordered some, came through Amazon, and other service providers are available, and and I've been trying it for the last 35 days, and I want to talk to you about it. So Onnit is a company based out of the US. It's a company which has risen to fame because it's involved with several podcasts and other shows which have kind of helped boost the profile. And it's a really, really big supplement company. They do protein shakes and other things to kind of ultimately their aim as companies to try and make you better. The supplement industry, I found this out earlier, is worth 30 billion, which is huge. And it's one of the biggest industries and one of the most fastest growing industries in the United States at the moment. And it is absolutely huge. A lot of people in the US are worried about the fact that it's unregulated, but Onnit Alpha Brain is something which is very regulated, and we get on to talk about that later in the show. And so my history is that over the last 35 days, I've been taking the recommended amount of tablets every single day, and I've kind of logged and discussed kind of how it's benefited me and how I've changed as a result. And that's what I want to break down to you today. So that's an interesting thing. A study is just based on one person, but we go far beyond that in today's episode. I wanted to try it to be able to talk as a first-hand, you know, user of that product. I don't want to kind of come on here and say, oh, this is what these people said, but I actually don't know personally. I can tell you how it's affected me personally and the benefits and various other things like that. So let's kind of explain the science behind such a product. Nootropics are incredibly popular at the moment. They're kind of a big boom. They're not quite as well known as the likes of other supplements such as protein shakes or vitamins or various other things that people take. But they're incredibly popular around the world, and they're used by an awful lot of people. And Onnit, like many other companies, they're probably one of the more well-respected and one of the companies which has more kind of proof behind their product. And they've done various clinical studies to actually prove that these nootropics or protein powders or whatever they produce actually work. And so on the Alpha Brain clinical study, I read it this afternoon, and it's really fascinating. They are regulated by the US Food and Drug Administration, which I don't imagine is easy. And from my knowledge of doing work experience at companies such as GSK, the drug industry is incredibly difficult to kind of get through, and clinical trials are very difficult because you've got to prove beyond reasonable doubt that your product has absolutely no negative side effects to human health, otherwise it would never get released and approved by the agencies. And so what also the test does is test the placebo effect. They analysed it in the clinical trials, and what this involves is giving some set of people a tablet with nothing in, just kind of a general compound, and then some people the actual kind of compound that you want to test, the alpha brain, and to see that if the people with the kind of the compound which is actually nothing felt that they got a difference and felt that they improved. And basically what they proved that the placebo effect isn't in place here, and that although it might help, it doesn't actually, the product proves that it does work beyond the placebo effect, and that it actually is beneficial, which is huge. And not a lot of studies do this, and it's kind of the thing that people often say, make these wild claims about drugs, and it's kind of difficult. The reason I chose to kind of analyse and look at Alpha Brain is because they're a product which is regulated. They're also something which is reliable. You're going to know as a supplement kind of taker what you're going to get. You're not going to get something which you haven't requested, and that's very important. And so they did tests on 16 to 35-year-olds, a whole bunch of them, and over a 6-week period kind of analysed their results. And the results were really interesting. The definition and the kind of the summary of the report is that it improves neuropsychological measures, which is a bit of a mouthful. And basically what that means is it improves cognitive ability in certain phases. And one of the big improvements which it lays claim to is that it has many verbal improvements. Your recognition and recollection of words is much better. And we hear about this from the very famous comedian Joe Rogan, which I'm going to play a clip on in a second. He talks about his experience of Alpha Brain and Onnit. He is as far as I'm aware, maybe a part owner or an investor in Onnit, so he does have a kind of a background in it, and he has had a slight vested interest. But his kind of analysis and discussion on how it affects him is interesting nevertheless, because he's somebody who's taken this supplement for an awful long time. And so without further ado, we're going to get into that episode, and here's Joe Rogan and the owner of Onnit, Marcus Aubrey.
So a story that not a lot of people know is that when Onnit was in its infancy and we were messing around with some different formulas, I came to you and I said, Joe, what would be the formula that you would like the most, that you would use the most? And you said, you thought about it for a second, and you said, a nootropic. I'd like a cognitive enhancer. I said, okay, and got to work. Started talking to the doctors and medical professionals I knew, started doing the research, started going back and knowing what had worked for me, talked about what had worked for you, and then some 6 to 8 months later, we had a sample batch of what was going to be Alpha Brain, and it's been a really wild ride and an interesting story since then. So take us through some of your perspective from that very first sample of Alpha Brain to kind of now what it's become and how it's been a part of your life.
Well, I got into nootropics because of Bill Romanowski's formula. He had a thing called Neuro 1 that I believe had a little caffeine in it as well. And he had developed it because he was having some problems with concussions. And I tried it, and that introduced me to the world of nootropics. And then I started dabbling with all these different various individual ingredients. And when you put together Alpha Brain, it was the first time that I ever had anything where I really felt like I didn't want to do anything without it. Yeah. Like I felt like if I was going to do stand-up, if I was going to do the UFC, like I wanted to be fully charged, because what I noticed when I started taking it is one of the immediate things that I noticed was that I had a better recall of words. That's the frustrating thing where you're like, what is the word? What is the word? What is the word? That wasn't happening as much. And my ability to form sentences seemed smoother. It seemed like I had an extra gear, like I was one step ahead of conversations.
And interestingly enough, that's one of the tests that showed statistical significance in our little pilot study was verbal memory. So recalling words and being able to use your vocabulary.
It's 100% legit. If I go to a UFC and I don't have Alpha Brain, I panic. I really do.
I remember running to you with a couple sticks of 180.
It's not a joke. I take it before every podcast. I even oftentimes take it on the air just to let people know, like, I really take this.
Yeah.
And everybody I know that I've given it to, everybody I know that I trust their opinion and I've had them try it, they all have the same result. They say this does something. It gives me like some boost, some mental boost. It just makes sense. And it's kind of a fascinating thing because there's a lot of people that they look at things like nootropics or vitamins and nutrients, and one of the things that gets tossed around, which is kind of hilarious, is the term pseudoscience. But
snake oil.
Yeah, snake oil is another one. But pseudoscience is one of the most hilarious ones, because how do you think these things got extracted? Like, they got extracted because of science.
Right.
Like, it's not pseudoscience, it's actual science. Like, there's only one way you're going to get choline or vitamin B12 or any nutrient. Figure out how to make this stuff.
Totally.
And these aren't like imaginary compounds that people have invented on their own and then tried to sell as snake oil. These are actual nutritional supplements that are actually parts of food, and these extracts have been proven to be beneficial.
Sure. Take the example of the alpha brain, and in it is a compound called Huperzia serrata, which is an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor. So it prevents the breakdown of acetylcholine. If you didn't know that the brain needed acetylcholine, and that was a neurotransmitter, and you didn't know that there was something called an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor, you would never know to search this exotic club moss out of some pond in China as it was naturally growing. And of course they did find that, and they found the way that it had these compounds, huperzine A, huperzine B, huperzine C, which actually help give the brain the ability to have more ready available acetylcholine. And one of the effects of that, of course, is the mental sharpness, the focus, the memory, some of the things that you're talking about. But one of the interesting things that we didn't really realize is that it affects your dreams, too. And that was from the first sample batch. You know, we would just be like, hey, do you have crazy dreams? And then we started looking, because we weren't targeting dreams.
No.
But it's just something that kind of came out. And then everybody we gave it to was like, man, my dreams were insane.
So that was the founder of Onnit and Joe Rogan, the famous podcaster, talking about the effect that the alpha brain had on them. And it's a very interesting point. They talked about the dreams and the kind of having a bit more of a vivid imagination while they're asleep. And that is not something which I encountered a huge amount. I kind of carried on as normal, and during my test, which I'll get onto and talk about in a second, it didn't affect me too much. But it was really interesting speaking how they think, and kind of it was interesting the fact that and Joe is so reliant on the product. And it's kind of like coffee is the best way I would describe it. People try and take coffee when they need to concentrate before an important meeting or in the morning to kind of wake them up and get them going. And I think if you asked a lot of those people, would they rather not be on coffee, the answer would be yes. But they feel like it has a significant benefit to them. And there's been millions and millions of studies on the effect of coffee. And obviously, with it being illegal to sell in so many places, the people determine that the effects aren't that bad. And I think it's an interesting debate which is going to be going further and further on in the future, because these sort of supplements for the mind are going to go on for the eternity. Drugs tend to be about 20 years behind where we are currently. The general process, and what I heard, it might be different for supplements, but drugs take 20 years to get to market with all the clinical tests and all the kind of the adaptation and all the development of their processes. Especially that's how it works at major companies. And, look at where we were 20 years ago. 20 years ago, 1997, I had just been born, and, the world was a very different place. Technology wasn't anywhere near as advanced as it is. And so I think we're going to see in the future much more powerful drugs. I spoke to scientists who have told me that, in the future, acne and various other drugs won't be a thing, because they are developing such sophisticated medicine at the moment that it's going to kind of eliminate that. And there's various potential futures with genetic modification. But I think the fact of supplements and kind of medicines for the mind is going to become an even bigger topic in the future, and it's going to be a huge debate which the government is going to have to look at and kind of analyse on, is this what we want our people to be doing? Is this what we want the public to be taking? And is it actually beneficial for our society? And I think that's a very interesting debate which is going to go on far longer than I'm around, and for a very long time, because it's going to keep on developing. Here we're going to play another clip about some people who are talking about kind of these other drugs which are on the market. These aren't publicly available, they're not sold, they're not supplements, these drugs. And we hear some clips from some experts on them, and also some people who've tried them themselves and kind of what they think about them.
These are smart drugs.
These are agents looking to enhance or extend our cognitive abilities, or the repertoire of actions that we have.
Basically a series of drugs that people in homes, offices and universities across the United Kingdom are using to apparently make their brain better. Many are drugs you might have heard of before, with conventional uses. Things like Ritalin, a drug usually used for ADHD and narcolepsy. Others you might not have, like phenylparacetam, a drug that's now a banned performance enhancer. One of the most talked about and easily available smart drugs in the UK is a drug called modafinil. Used traditionally for narcolepsy, it's being sold all over the internet as a cognitive enhancer, a drug to make your brain work like no other.
It seems that modafinil is a cognitive enhancer, so it shows that there were improvements in so-called higher cognitive functions like planning and decision making.
Modafinil has been labelled the world's first safe smart drug, with some studies suggesting it's non-addictive, has few side effects, and that it works. But can all this really be true? That's what I'm trying to find out.
Okay, so at this point, smart drugs just seem like miracle pills. I've been reading reviews about them online, and some of them are just ridiculous. People saying they have written full university dissertations in a matter of days, they have managed to do work that would usually take them a week in just one day, and that their overall concentration levels have just skyrocketed. To be entirely honest, I struggle to believe this because it just sounds too good to be true. So, what I'm currently doing is ordering some modafinil off of the internet, which is one of the main drugs people take, to see if it works.
Oh, I can feel it working.
You actually can?
Yeah.
Like, what does it feel like?
Just like when I was talking to you there, I found myself getting quicker and quicker.
No.
No, I did. Like, I felt like I was talking too quickly. I was trying to get too much in.
Describe, like, what it actually feels like.
So, like, without sounding weird, it sounded a little bit warmer. Like, I feel a little bit warmer. So I feel like my body temperature has increased. You just feel a little bit sharper. I think I could probably compare it to a camera that's in focus and a camera that's out of focus. I think normally maybe everything's a little bit softer. Right now, everything feels very sharp.
Just tell me exactly how modafinil works. Do we know how it works?
Well, we know a lot about its actions in the brain, and we know that it affects a lot of different neurotransmitters. But what we don't really know is which one of those effects has to do with the improvements that we see in people's cognitions. We know that it acts on dopamine and noradrenaline. It also seems to act on another transmitter, glutamate, and we think all of these are important for cognitive function.
Do these actually make you more intelligent?
Depends what you mean by do they make you more smart. They certainly might improve your ability to plan and problem solve. So if you can problem solve better, are you getting smarter?
Modafinil is something often associated with students. But there are some in another less reported community that are taking them as well. The world of tech startups. Marcus is an app developer, and he started taking modafinil to get ahead of the game.
Hello. Hey, nice to meet you, man. Good to meet you, sir. It wasn't like I was taking a drug and it was giving me some kind of high and making me actually happier. But the feeling that I was getting a lot done was very exciting.
Tell me about your frame of mind, just like that. I was trying to get into your head.
Yeah. Frame of mind is very important. Yeah. My frame of mind was, I need to create the next startup and make it work. So I just experienced quite a big failure and I wanted to make a success instead.
So you started taking modafinil at the same time you stopped working at the other place?
Yes, and that's an interesting point. So when my startup kind of bombed, this is something interesting to think about. When it bombed, I was obviously feeling very, very low. And I'm a very positive-minded person, so I instantly looked for something to make me feel better about my life and my circumstances. So a theory I have is that when I took the drug for the first time, I may have subconsciously exaggerated to myself how much it was helping me because I knew it made me feel better.
Because you're taking this to kind of get better, to be more productive, and in essence to be more successful.
Yeah.
I mean, has it shown any sign of doing that yet?
In terms of the success of my life in general, no, I haven't suddenly gone from being a loser to Mr. Successful.
So that was some first-hand experiences of how they found some of the kind of the super drugs, the dark, the kind of the market, the drugs that were on kind of, the black market where you get them online from a dodgy company online and you don't necessarily know what's in them. And I think that's kind of a really scary part as someone who takes, a protein supplement and as someone who's tried Alpha Brain for the last 35 days. You want to know what you're getting. You want to be sure and positive. You don't want to be taking something which could potentially harm you. And that is very, very important. And I think it was a really interesting point that he made there, how how does, if you can be more successful, does that bring happiness? Not necessarily, but if you feel like you're getting more done and you're kind of achieving your ability, maybe that helps. And it's an interesting debate, which is going to go on further into the debate of these supplements and these kind of super drugs, if you will. And let's talk about my experience with Alpha Brain. How the last 35 days have been kind of testing it and seeing if it works for me. And I think my experience is interesting. Definitely, I'm not sure if it's the placebo effect. It does feel like you're on like a better day, is how I would describe it. And does that work all the time? Eventually you don't notice it as much, but when I look back at my last 30 days, I've had a pretty good time. I've got a lot of work done, I've been really productive, and I've been a reasonably good version of myself. I've eaten far too much food, and I definitely haven't been strict enough on my diet, but don't think this is really affected or really related. But no, it's been really interesting and really fascinating, and it's difficult to know, has it helped me, or is it just, I've got back into full swings of university, and am I kind of naturally going back to being more productive, and, because I've got so busy, having to push myself harder than I did maybe over the summer and over kind of a less busy time of the year. And that's interesting, but it's fascinating. And from my journal, I've written down kind of my experiences each day, and they're overwhelmingly positive. And it's something that, when I needed to concentrate, when I needed to focus really hard on something, and some days, like everybody, you can't focus hard, you can't concentrate, you don't know what it is like to concentrate, you really want to sit down, you really want to get that work done, but you just can't. Your body just doesn't seem to want to do what you're telling it to do. And for me, that helped with that, and I think it's an interesting one. Will I take it in the future? I don't really feel the need. I feel like I can perform to the best of my ability without such supplements. But, occasionally if there was a test and I wasn't feeling particularly great, I might look at it. It's something that I potentially consider. And so what does the tablet effect, and how does it fit? I think I always found that it was better taking it on a full stomach. I often find that if you take tablets on an empty stomach, I have quite a bad reaction to them. Does it make it better? Does it make anything easier? And that's a really interesting debate. I think it depends who you are. And like we heard with the previous clip, it depends how you are, whether, some of these drugs that you can find on the black market help you. Some people find and get positive responses, and some people don't. And I think that's a very interesting thing. One thing which I found for me is that it can sometimes make me better at speaking. I wish I had it today, stumbling all over the place. But nevertheless, your verbal recognition, your verbal recollection has improved for me. And I think that's something which is spoken about by the founders of the Alpha Brain, with Joe Rogan there. He was saying that that's his personal experience, and it's also what is mentioned in the clinical study. So finally, I didn't really experience any dreams or anything like that, anything out of the usual in that. And I think it's an interesting and really, really fascinating industry, which is going to be much bigger in the future, and also much more kind of significant, because we're going to see maybe potentially drug tests before university exams, or drug tests before GCSEs and A-levels, which are kind of a bit like your freshman or sophomore exams, which you have in the US, get into college, get into university. Those sort of things, I think you might probably be drug tested in the future, because people might necessarily not play on a level playing field, and either you've got to, let everybody use these supplements or potential drugs, or you let nobody. And I think that's a really interesting thing which is going to carry on, and a really interesting debate which is going to go forwards. And it'd be interesting to see how the regulators deal with it. The UK regulating body are really big on trying to stop these black market kind of, make yourself better drugs at the moment, because they are unregulated. And like we heard, you don't necessarily know what's in them. So it's a fascinating topic, and I hope you've enjoyed this section of the podcast. But like always on the radio show and on the podcast from now on, we're going to hear from Emily Aspinall about how she's getting on in China. Do check us out on social media at ListenUpCast on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. You can find our previous episodes, which have been kind of special mixed martial arts, interviews with world-class journalists, producers, CEOs and incredible sportsmen as well. So do check that out. But let's get into the fun part of the show, the bit more kind of relaxed, less kind of produced and less kind of, focused. This is kind of where I delve into topics of the week and kind of talk about what's been happening in my life here in Sheffield at the University of Sheffield, studying mechanical engineering. And let me tell you, it's a busy time of the year. Internships, masters, applications, they're all really kind of backing me up. But I've been enjoying it, been kind of getting some applications done, and definitely been getting some assignments done. So don't worry, mum and dad, it's been good. One of my big friends, and someone I've really got to know really well at university, who's currently on a year abroad in China is Emily Aspinall. She is teaching a classroom of Chinese kids every single week, which I think must be incredibly challenging. One, their English is probably much better than any of my languages, but it's still nevertheless very impressive that, you know, somebody has gone out there for an entire year to dedicate herself to teaching other people. And I think that's really remarkable, and well done, Emily, for doing that. I'd be petrified going to China. You don't know what it's like. You'd also stand out like a sore thumb because, you know, apparently she is not, obviously there's a lot more Chinese people there than there are Westerners. And so I'm sure Emily walks down the street and people's turn heads, if you will. I find that bizarre. I find it very difficult. I'm somebody who likes my creature comforts. I like living at home. I like having everything together, you know, be able to pop home for a weekend and relax and chill with the family. That's not something you can do whilst in China for a year. So it's incredibly impressive. Keep going, Emily. And we're going to hear how she got on this week over in China. And she has an interesting story to tell us about Halloween.
I'm back for another week of my adventures in China. Hope you're doing well down in Sheffield. As you will know, tomorrow is a special day. It's Halloween. So it's my first proper festival in China. And they actually don't celebrate it here. So I thought this week in my classes I would teach my students about Halloween and the traditions that we have in England. And as I was teaching them about Halloween, I said, so do you celebrate Halloween in China? That was one of the first questions I asked. And they said, no, Emily, no, we don't celebrate it here. We don't do trick-or-treating, we don't dress up, nothing happens. So I thought, oh, okay, you know, interesting, different cultures, etc. But there's a group of us here that are English and we wanted to celebrate Halloween. So this weekend we decided to go out. Went to a few bars and celebrated Halloween. And because my students all told me that Halloween wasn't a thing here and no one dressed up, I got myself ready, got into a taxi, I turned up at the bar where I was meeting everyone, and every single person in the bar was dressed in fancy dress but me. And I turned up and my friends were like, where's your fancy dress? And I was like, well, you know, they don't celebrate Halloween in China. And they were like, yeah, but, you know, we're here, we're English, we're celebrating Halloween. So I was very much the odd one out, and all night people kept saying to me, where's your costume? So I just went with the fact that I was a girl from Wigan, and that should be a scary enough thing. So my fancy dress was just me being Emily from Wigan. But since then I have learned a fun fact about Chinese festivals and Halloween. They actually have a different festival called a Ghost Festival in July, and it's a few days at the end of July, and the Chinese all celebrate ghosts, and they think that people come back from the dead, so they celebrate those days. They get time off work, so that's like the Chinese version of Halloween. So yes, fun fact, and I hope you have a good week and a good Halloween back in Sheffield. Let me know what you get up to, and yeah, I will catch you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for that update from Emily there. Really nice to hear how she's doing in China. And as we come towards the end of the show, what am I going to be doing for Halloween? I'm going to be going out to the Sheffield Students' Union, having a good time with my friends. I'm dressing up as a nun, which is a bit controversial. I'm going to kind of make it very Halloween-y, get some fake blood, and really enjoy the event. And it was kind of funny that Emily always finds herself in amusing situations, but that's all it's all about, putting yourself out there, gaining new experiences, because I think you'll learn, and Emily will definitely learn for that from next time. Thank you very much for listening to this week's Listen Up with me, Ollie Baisley. We have some music to play out for the show, but if you're listening on the podcast, this is the end of the show. Do check us out on iTunes, subscribe and leave a review there if you can. Wherever else you're listening, do subscribe as well to catch the next episode. And as always, check us out on social media if you want to find out what we're doing in the rest of the week.